Hey, welcome to episode 9 of Work These Words with Chandria. Normally, these episodes are reserved exclusively for my inner circle community, which is our paid subscribers on Substack. But because of the nature of this week's post, I decided to open it up to everyone. So whether you're a free subscriber, a paid subscriber, or you came across this by some cosmic coincidence, I'm glad you're here, and I hope you can extract some value from this episode. That said, if you haven't listened to or read this week's post, Dear Hannah, I'd encourage you to pause this pod, go back and check out that post, and then come back here so the content will make more sense. Before we get started, I want to put this disclaimer out there. I am a generous practitioner. By that, I simply mean what I'm getting ready to share with you is descriptive. I am describing my circumstances and the journey that it has taken me to get to this present moment. I am not prescribing for you how you should handle circumstances, even if you consider your circumstances to be similar to mine. I think we need more of that in the body of Christ, where we stop this kind of painting with a broad brush and telling people that everyone should handle their circumstances the same way. I just don't think that's wise. So again, what I'm sharing with you is descriptive. It is not prescriptive. If I share something with you that can add value to your journey, add value to your situation, your circumstances, then by all means take it. If not, then leave it here. All right. So this week I turned 35 on Tuesday, and I don't know, it feels a bit different. I've been telling our church for the past maybe week or two that the thing that's really been on my mind is if God allows me to live as long as I've lived, I will be 70 years old. So if I get 35 more years, I will be 70. There's something about that for me that's just been sobering. I think I've always tried to be pretty serious about my life and my calling, but there's something about just that time frame that really kicks in a different gear of clarity and a different gear of seriousness. So turning 35, and I was thinking around, okay, what do I want to write about this week? And I've had this idea in my mind for quite some time, kind of tossing it around, but I'm not really a vulnerable type of person. When I say vulnerable, I mean, I don't mind sharing aspects of my life with people. So that's not the issue. There are certain aspects and certain parts of my life that I am still very much actively sorting through. And I try to, at least when I'm sharing something, have some degree of mastery in it, because I don't just want to give people information. I want to lead people to transformation. And that requires that you have some degree of mastery in the subject matter, because people are going to run into obstacles and they're going to need someone who's overcome the obstacles to help them overcome them. I said all that to say I was trying to avoid this subject and it wouldn't leave me alone. So I'm like, okay, let's pin it. And in the writing process, there was some starting and stopping, because if you read the piece, you know it's very personal for me. It's not simply just content because I'm looking for likes or I'm looking for shares. This is personal for me. And so I sit down, I get to writing, and of course, organizing sentences, the normal editing process, take things out, put this here, move that there. But the gist of it, I feel like, captures my heart. So I want to share some additional things that did not make it into the writing, because I try to keep it within a 5-6 minute reading mark so that it's not overwhelming, both for me and for those who will listen. So for starters, my mother's name isn't Hannah. Hopefully you knew that, but in case you didn't, my mother's name isn't Hannah. It was a metaphor based on a biblical story of Hannah and Samuel. We know Samuel, the kingmaker. He is the one who ends up anointing Saul. He's the one who ends up anointing David. And the Bible calls him a seer. Just an incredible legacy that he lives and leaves that I feel uniquely drawn to. Again, I was in a coaching program, and one of the things the mentor talked about with us was biblical avatars and being able to see ourselves in biblical characters. Of course, no story fits perfectly. So your story doesn't fit perfectly into their story. Their story doesn't fit perfectly into yours. But I do think there's some things that we can extract from those stories. And so for me, Samuel's is just very high on that avatar list because of providence and the mothering and so many different dynamics that are at play. So my mother's name isn't Hannah. It's a metaphor from the biblical text. So I was born in New Jersey and we end up in South Carolina. I'm not 100% sure. I remember coming to South Carolina and not being sure of why we were coming to South Carolina. And of course, I was a kid at the time, so there were aspects of the story that I wasn't introduced to until later, rightfully so. And I remember thinking, okay, maybe we're visiting, and then that wasn't the case. And so it's like, well, what am I supposed to do here? So a little backstory. My cousins who are my age are in New Jersey. So I have cousins. My mom and two of her sisters were pregnant at the same time. So I have a cousin whose birthday is in May. I have a cousin whose birthday is 4th of July. And then my birthday is August the 18th. So we're right behind each other. We've got a cousin who's behind us. We have cousins who are in front of us. So there's pretty much a cousins group, if you will, when in that regard. And we know if you have been blessed with that kind of family dynamic, then you know very often outside of siblings, your cousins become your first friends. So I didn't want to come to South Carolina because I would be leaving them behind. And their family dynamic, my mom's side of the family, that family dynamic is different than my dad's side of the family in that my dad's side of the family is much more spread out. So I have cousins, first cousins that I've never met to this day. And so the dynamics are just very different. So leaving my cousins who are my age, who would have naturally been my first friends, was just not something that I was interested in doing, to come to South Carolina and pretty much be isolated from at least people my age. And over the course of time, I come to understand that there's something different about my life from a family perspective. So my mother was around, but she was also navigating through, which again, I didn't know at the time, but she was also navigating through her own challenges and her own struggles when it came to addiction. So there would be lots of days where she'd be gone. I mean, days at a time, hadn't seen her. And again, as a kid, it's kind of hard to make sense of that. But as you get older and you start to put the pieces together. So that was pretty much my childhood. Again, I have bits and pieces here where, you know, she was present and I could tell that she had that mother thing that you're supposed to have. And then just life and circumstances and situations kept her from being the person that I felt like she could have been. Again, I'm talking retrospect here, but there are things that I feel like she had that life circumstances just would not allow her to fully step into. And so one day, I'll never forget this day as long as I live. It was March the 6th, 2002. So March the 6th is my dad's birthday, and it was a Wednesday. So you can go look at the calendar. It was I will never forget this day as long as I live. It was a Wednesday, and I grew up in a house where we went to church. We went to church. So on Sunday I was in church, on Wednesday I was in church. So we had Bible study. And I remember my mom coming to get me from Bible study. Never happens. So I knew something was up. At this point, I'm 11. I knew something was up. And she comes to get me and she says, "Hey, I got something to tell you." And I'm like, "Okay." And she says, "I'm going back to New Jersey." So my mother's from New Jersey, born and raised. And I'm like, okay. I'm thinking she's going to visit because we had gone to visit several times between moving here and that particular moment. We had gone back to New Jersey several. So her saying I'm going back to New Jersey wasn't abnormal. And she said, no, I'm moving back to New Jersey. And so at that point, I'm like, And you can just imagine being that age and you're trying to sort through what that means. And again, you don't have the tools emotionally to be able to sort through what that means. And I'm like, okay, so when are you leaving? And she says, tonight. So not only are you leaving, and that's been sprung on me that you're leaving. So even if you were leaving in 2 weeks, that's still, no, you're leaving tonight. And again, it's a Wednesday night. So I go home and she's packing, she's getting her things ready, she's getting ready to get on the bus, whole nine. And I got to go to school the next day. So you got a bedtime. I remember laying down and it finally clicks. Like, oh, she's leaving. And I remember laying in the bed and just crying myself to sleep. And the thing that I will never forget is the sound of the door closing. And I knew then she was gone. And just imagine, again, you got to wake up in the morning and go to school without the tools that you need to be able to think through, process any of the stuff that has just transpired over the last few hours. But you got to go to school. You got to put your best foot forward. You got to be a kid, all that. And it has taken years for me to really see the impact of that night unfold over the course of my life. It has taken years to see it and be able to connect the dots because, as many of you know, there's so much content out here about fatherlessness. And I think there should be, but there's not enough. I mean, they're getting a little better at it now, but back then there was no content out about motherlessness, especially from abandonment. We're not talking about a mom passes away. We're talking about someone makes a choice not to be present. And so over the course of time, you start to see the way that it shows up. And I remember getting to a point where I did not want to feel the pain I felt that night. And so it became my goal to avoid any real connections that could potentially lead to that kind of pain. Now, for me, it was a little different. I know there are some people who they get hurt and they go on this mission to hurt people. I wasn't trying to hurt nobody. I was just trying to make sure nobody hurt me. So that was my thing. I wasn't out to get nobody. I just didn't want you to get me. So most of my relationships and friendships and various things were always surface level. They were always surface level. It was, I am going to invest enough so that you feel like we are in relationship, but I am not going to invest enough that you can hurt me. I hope you following me. And so that was my MO. That was my MO with friendships. That was my MO in romantic relationships. That was my MO when it came to mentoring relationships, all that stuff. I didn't care who you were. I didn't care if you were adult. I didn't care who you were. I had no intentions on letting you get close enough to me that I could feel that pain again. And so that's pretty much how I've lived my life. And it wasn't until get to the teenage years and really start to feel, I was always a gifted kid. So anybody who knows me, if you talk to people who from my home church, who old school from my home church, when I was always a gifted kid, Again, I didn't always see it because it took time to really connect the dots. But as I talk to people much older who were there when I got to South Carolina, they talk about, they knew, they saw it. And I would hear that growing up. And it got to a point where I really felt like, okay, it's I'm supposed to be doing something with my life. And I think it's time to start exploring what that something might be. And so I went to my pastor. I was 15 years old. Again, guys, I just turned 35. So we're talking 20 years. I went to my pastor to, hey, this is what I feel like God is calling me to. And we're walking through that. His process, it lasted about a year and 4 months before I got a license. So I've been preaching in terms of licensing since 2008. So 18 years. And my ministry journey started 20 years ago. So it's taken me almost that time to be able to connect the dots when it comes to certain things. So I make the decision to go into ministry and to serve God with my entire life. I remember one of the things I said to my pastor as we were discerning that, like, I'm not in here because I'm having a midlife crisis. Like, I'm here because I feel like God has called me to do this. If Jesus is not the truth, I will have wasted my entire life. So I was serious about that. And so as I journey in ministry, and it comes with its own challenges. I don't have too many horror. I've had my share of ups and downs, like anybody who's been doing anything for a long time. But one of the things I'm grateful for is I just don't have a lot of horror stories. And some of that is because of what I just shared, that I've made sure that I kept people at a distance. So part of, some of the things I've experienced, some people may consider them to be horror stories. But for me, it wasn't a horror story because I didn't trust you no way. So for me, that was always the thing. But it wasn't until I began this Jesus journey, and I want to turn the corner here, that I really started to consider that maybe there was a larger plan at work here. So I remember sitting on the pulpit. Those of you who from traditional church, you know what I mean by pulpit. And I feel like I was at church, but I was watching church. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, okay, there has to be more than this. I was doing all the stuff that they tell you to do: give, serve, try to treat people right. I was trying to do that to the best of my abilities. And I feel like I was on this hamster's wheel. And so I started this journey. I came across Romans 8:29. And it says, whom he foreknew, he also did predestine to be conformed to the image of his son. It was at that moment that I realized the goal, the purpose of the Christian life is for God to conform us into the image of Jesus. So if I'm supposed to be like Jesus, if that's the goal, if that's the plan, then what was Jesus like? And I didn't know. Mind you, I had a license, I had an ordination certificate, and I had no idea what Jesus was like. I knew what he did because I was preaching about it. He did miracles, he did signs, he did wonders. Had no idea what he was like in terms of character. Because if we're going to emulate him, we can't just emulate miracles. We've got to emulate his character. So I went on this journey to discover that. And I've been on that journey ever since. It's revolutionized the way that I see the Bible, the way that I preach, the way that I see church, the way that I see everything. It's totally transformed my life. But it led me to this idea of providence, which comes from two root words: pro, which means before, video, which means to see. So we believe that God sees before. He sits in this timeless seat of eternity, so he sees what's going to happen. And we believe that he's orchestrating according to what he sees. Providence. When I ran into that concept, I started to think through the dynamics of my own life. And it starts with my mother. It starts with my mother. So I realized, okay, what if all of this was part of the plan? So as I start to connect the dots, again, when I'm younger, I see these things, but I don't really know what's going on. So I know we're in South Carolina, but I don't know why. My mother leaves. I don't really know why. I end up in ministry. Don't really know why. So by the time I start exploring this idea of providence, it's like, oh, you arranged a set of circumstances or used a set of circumstances. I know there are people who theologically, they feel a ways about that. I think in my case, I think the circumstances were sovereignly arranged. And I had to come to South Carolina because I was going to be taken from my parents. My dad made the decision to bring me down south to his mother. I come down south and she introduces me to church. She introduces me to Jesus. That church cultivates my faith. And ultimately, it walks me into God's calling, which is just the invitation that he extends to us to be a part of the reason we were created. So as I start to trace those things, I'm like, wait a minute. If that doesn't happen, then this doesn't happen. And if this doesn't happen, then this doesn't happen. And if this doesn't happen, then this doesn't happen. And now I've got to sit with all of these pieces as they start to come together. And so much of my life was spent feeling a ways about my mother. I wrote in the post, what started off as hurt turned into hatred. Because I'm just like, how could you, like, you just leave me? And when she went back to New Jersey, I mean, I could count within the 365-day year how often we would communicate. So we're not talking about, we in constant communication. No, it was pretty much like she was gone. So I spent years just hating her because of that. And then as I'm starting to sort through this providence thing, and I'm like, if she's not wrestling with addiction and there isn't this opportunity to take me away from my parents, if my dad doesn't say, well, I know where I can take him, if my grandmother doesn't say yes, just so many different things that had to happen to get me to this moment. And so here's what has been hard for me. So I mentioned at the very beginning, this is why I'm a generous practitioner, because I'm still sorting through and still very much making sense of my own journey. When I think about providence, there's a cute side and then there's a not so cute side. So the cute side is God arranges, God works all these things together. And so there are people who will look at my life and it's like God knew what he was doing. And that sounds great for them. But for me, I'm sitting and I'm saying, there's a relationship with my cousins that I, up until this point, haven't been able to have just because of the distance. So a lot of the memories and things that they share with each other, had it not been for these set of circumstances, I would have been there. So I got to sort through that. And then I'm thinking to myself, all of this traces back to my mother's addiction. So if there is no addiction, if she had been the kind of mother that I wanted her to be, I feel confident in saying I would not be a preacher. I feel confident in saying I would not be a pastor. So how do I reconcile that? I understand it cognitively, because again, I understand the concept of providence. But there's a gap sometimes, depending on what day you catch me, between head and heart. What I understand cognitively is hard to sit in my heart some days. Because I know addictions and those types of things, a person makes a decision to get into those spaces. And I think about how it has robbed not just me of her, it has robbed her of her. And I'm thinking to myself, why did it have to be this way? So the not so cute side of providence is, it costs me to do this. So those of you who've had the opportunity to experience my ministry in any way, shape, or form, and just the passion and the tenacity and the seriousness and the study and all the things that I try to bring to whatever platform, whatever environment I'm in. There's a reason it costs me to do this. It costs me to do this. I don't have the first friend relationship with my cousins because I was supposed to do this. I don't have the relationship with my mother because I was supposed to do this. Now, there's some of you who hear that and you're just like, oh, that's a bit extreme. Let's just call it what it is. Again, I was born in New Jersey. There was no reason for me to ever come to South Carolina. Now, who's to say at some point, hey, maybe we would come and visit my grandmother? But I had no reason to move to South Carolina. None. My dad was living in New Jersey. Again, my mom was from New Jersey. I had no reason to come here. I had no reason to move here. This cost me. So that's why I'm serious. That's why I get annoyed with people who not serious. That's why when I look out at the state of ministry and I see them handing out credentials like it's government assistance, it flat out pisses me off because this cost me. This cost me. I had to earn this. And I'm not saying this for sympathy, guys, but I do want to give you context for who I am. Because at this point in my life, this is me. This is who I am. I'm working really hard to become a better version of this. But this me. What you see is what you get. This me. And so as I land this plane, because again, I want to, as a generous practitioner, I want to help you to see your own story. There are some elements and aspects of your own story that I believe God has sovereignly arranged. Now, theologically, how do you sort that out? That's going to be a challenge, which is part of the reason why I think people need to be very careful about the kind of churches that they go to. I'm not even going to get on that soapbox, but people need to be very careful about the kind of churches that they go to. Because there are things about your life that don't fit neatly into these theological boxes. And if you don't have space to sit with and sort through some of these dynamics, this is why we see people leaving the faith. Now, I'm not one of those people who believe that you always have answers, because I still got questions. Even with all that I understand at this present moment, I still have questions. But I have a theological framework that allows me to have questions and still keep working. Have questions and not fall apart. Have questions and not leave the faith altogether. And I pray that same thing for you. So if you're listening to this and it has conjured up memories and things for you as it relates to your own situation and your own circumstances, I wish I had the answers for you, but I don't. But here's what I'm sure of. And we know that God causes all things to work together for good. They don't feel good. They aren't good. But God, in his wisdom, causes them to work together for good. All right. That's all I've got time for in this week's episode. If you're a paid subscriber, you know this is a little longer than they normally are, but I wanted to get this out. If you're a free subscriber and you're interested in these kinds of conversations, I'd encourage you to consider the paid option. If you are okay with just the long form post, great. This is not a sales pitch. I'm simply saying if this has added some value and you want to go beyond the post each week, then I'd encourage you to consider the paid option. Until next time, thank you for working these words with me.